Greetings and salutations and welcome to A Conversation with Colin Was Right. Of course, a fusion of really our first show on Kind of Funny before we were in Kind of Funny and our newest show, Colin Was Right. I'm joined by my good friend Dan Adelman, indie game marketer extraordinaire, has a history at Nintendo, does PR, very smart gaming mind. So I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know we talked about this. We correspond more than we probably should. And I remember in the email that we were talking about with this, I explained to you that the idea behind this interview series is, and the reason it's called A Conversation with Colin Was Right was not only the alliteration that I like so much, but I wanted to have people on that either took umbrage with something that was from the Colin Was Right series or that we can kind of work off of episodes of Colin Was Right. And specifically, since you and I are going to cover indie games and a little later kind of the politicization of games, I wanted to point people towards episode 2 of Colin Was Right and episode 4 of Colin Was Right. The first one, or episode 2, is There Are Too Many Games, which is a real indie game centric episode, and then Politics, Social Issues, and Video Games, which is episode 4. So if you want a little background, you can go check those out. Otherwise, stay right here. Dan.
Yes.
You have a really interesting history. You were very prolific and well known at Nintendo for a long time. And were really hard, like banging that drum, the indie drum there. Seems like much to the chagrin of the company, maybe, or at least it didn't. Well,
yeah. Well. So when I first started, so I don't know if anyone watching this has any idea who I am. So, because it's a little bit insider baseball kind of thing,
which I love.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's totally your thing. But like a lot of developers would know who I am, but like consumers and fans might not know like who the developers work with at the different companies,
right.
And that would be an impressive level of depth that you get into to know the behind the scenes stuff. But so when I started at Nintendo, it was like late 2005, or early 2006, before the Wii launched. And the reason I went to Nintendo, I had been at Microsoft, at Xbox for about 5.5 years before that, and I was getting kind of frustrated at Xbox that all the games just looked the same. They were all like, we have both kinds of games, third-person shooters and first-person shooters, and it was like everything is exactly the same. And I didn't know if Nintendo would be successful with the Wii, but I liked that they were at least trying to do something. So I wanted to be a part of that. And so I started working there. And we talked a little bit about the digital distribution strategy when I was like a new employee there. And I quickly realized nobody has any plans for like, what should we do with this thing? Do we even want to do digital distribution? Like, I helped launch the original XBLA on the original Xbox. Mm-hmm. So back when it was on a disc, it was like 2003 or something like that. And so it was still a relatively new thing. Valve wasn't a thing. There was no Steam really. But everyone knew, like, in the future, probably digital distribution will be important. But at the time, digital distribution really meant casual games, like Match 3, Hidden Objects. And I was like, I really hate those games. Those games all suck. But we could probably, use this different form factor to do something like where people could explore their creativity a lot better. Because one of the barriers that had existed before was everything had to be retail, and to put things on disc and ship it to retail and store it in inventory, that just added a lot of cost, and so there's a lot of risk. So publishers really couldn't bet a whole lot on some like crazy new idea, because if they didn't sell, like that could bankrupt a company. Like look at what happened to THQ. They tried a couple of things, didn't work, and then they're dead.
And then, they're gone.
Yeah. So that's kind of the goal that I set. And so I found games like World of Goo was probably like my first big indie hit that I kind of helped shepherd through. Cave Story. So Nicholas, Tyrone Rodriguez, he was just kind of getting his start. We became good friends. He's now like doing Binding of Isaac Rebirth and a whole bunch of, or Afterbirth, I think it is now. So all kinds of developers that I got to work with over the course of 10 years. So that's kind of how I got my start at Nintendo, and how I kind of put myself out there is, really that I wanted to find a community of people who are interested in innovating, for lack of a better term. And I kind of stumbled upon the indie scene because it's hard to remember, but 10 years ago, there was no real indie scene. There was like a pocket of like 3 or 4 people here and there. They do local meetups. share their stuff, but it wasn't a commercial business. It wasn't a part of the industry.
Mostly because there was no, as you said, no way to distribute these games safely.
Exactly.
And there was no accommodation for a $10 game or a $15 game.
That's right.
Even though that's a perfectly reasonable price for a game like, an Axiom Verge, $20 or something like that. It's a perfectly reasonable price. So how did, I don't want to say things unwind, but I mean, how did you kind of segue out of Nintendo? Because that's kind of a fascinating thing to me. Not only in kind of your exit at Nintendo, which is when your name came to prominence for me, when I really started to investigate who you were and kind of really enjoyed the things you were saying, and I thought you were right on and continue to be, really right on. And that kind of leads us to Axiom Verge. So how did that all go down?
Sure. So for me, it wasn't like I wasn't upset with Nintendo. There was no bad blood or anything like that. I was just getting to a point where I really enjoyed the early days when I was building a new business. There are very few, anyone who works in corporate America can attest, like there are very few opportunities to build something new. A lot of times you're joining an existing project, you're maintaining it. And so that's what it started to feel like. Like when I started building the first digital distribution business, like none of the rules had been written. So I was kind of writing the rules, bouncing them off of NCL, Nintendo Japan. They would shut down some of those rules, so there was a lot of there was a lot of frustration there. I will admit, but but for the most part, it was like I had a say in shaping this major new thing in the industry, which was really exciting. By the time we got to the Wii U eShop, the 3DS eShop, it was just kind of maintaining. It was like, all right, we already know the drill, we already know the processes. It's just kind of more of the same, and so I felt like I wasn't really learning anything new, and I just wanted a new challenge. And so, not to get too far into the politics, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on this as well. One of the things that really helped me feel confident in quitting my day job is Obamacare, because my wife and daughter both have serious pre-existing conditions. No way they could get insurance. We could get insurance on the open market. But because of Obamacare and the stipulation that they have to cover pre-existing conditions, I felt, all right, I can go out, I can get insurance, and I can try this thing. And if it doesn't work, I'll go back to Nintendo with my tail between my legs. But fortunately, everything worked out. So Donald Trump kind of scares me when he says he might take that away, because it's like, I don't want to go back to Nintendo.
No, I'm sure you don't. For our politically ignorant listener or viewers, and of course the rest of the world doesn't really quite understand the United States.
Sure. Sorry.
Well, just they probably don't need this background because it's probably worldwide news for years now. But in the United States, if you work at a normal company, even kind of funny, we provide healthcare for our few employees. You can buy insurance that's kind of just unregulated in a sense where, I could have cancer, but if I get hired somewhere, my insurance is going to go through. I'm going to get insurance. But if you buy it on an open market, they can say like, no, you can't do that, until Obamacare said you had to. So that was a big step for a lot of people that wanted to start a small business.
Yeah, and also the insurance companies could just say, oh, you got cancer? Yeah, we don't need you anymore. You can stop paying your premiums. We don't want to cover you anymore, which was like, that's the whole reason I was paying for insurance.
Exactly. But it's very strange. I agree with you. It's a very strange thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings us to this kind of Wild West that we're in now, I feel like, with indies, where there's a lot of, I would say like bigger or more, like bigger companies like Devolver, for instance, kind of shepherding a lot of games, et cetera, and so on. But what I've been so impressed with you is that you have now found only one of these three games is out.
That's right.
But I've played Chasm and I've seen Majors of Australia several times now. And Axiom Verge obviously is fucking awesome. You seem to have an eye to just find and identify these very good games.
Thank you.
And I think that, it takes a level of awareness and a level of knowledge to know, like, this is it. Like, when I would look at Axiom Verge, to me, that's obviously going to be a hit. I mean, I saw that game. I remember, I feel like I was one of the first people you showed it to, and I was, when I was at IGN, and I was like, well, clearly it's going to be big. It's like when Yacht Club came to me before they announced Shovel Knight, and I was like, this game's gonna be fucking massive. I remember telling them, I'm like, it was unbelievable to me that they didn't have publishers groveling to try to get them. So how did that whole process go? Because I'm a friend of Tom Hap too, which is important to note. How did you find him? How did you find this game? And how did you know that this was the direction to go down? Because this is a risky endeavor. You're basically getting points on a game that you have to then work on for a couple of years and hope for the best, or it's all gonna get fucked up. So that's
right. Yeah. So one of the things I was pretty careful to do when I was at Nintendo, or when I was planning my exit, was I didn't want to reach out to any developers that I was working with. I didn't want them to feel pressure. Like if I said, hey, you know, I'm going to be leaving and I'm going to be doing like, you know, handling the business side of indie games, and, you know, do you want to work with me? Because I didn't want them to feel any pressure that if they didn't, I would somehow, you know, there would be some kind of retribution inside Nintendo. So I kept pretty quiet about it. Jason Schreier, actually, who I think you're also interviewing,
he's another
interviewee. He actually, so I left my job on Friday. Friday was my last day. I forget what day the date was, but the next day, Saturday, Jason sent me an email and he said, I've heard through the grapevine that you left Nintendo. And I was planning on announcing on Monday, this is my new thing, this is what I'm doing. And I was like, oh shit, please don't leak it yet. I kind of want to like announce it. I want to own but he was very cool about it. We did an interview, so I got to explain like kind of what I was doing. And so that actually, I was able to tell my story, which was really helpful. Tom Hap, very fortunately, saw that. And we had met before. I actually don't remember that we met. I think we had a quick conversation or something. But so he reached out. He showed me a build of his game, and I was like, this is exactly the kind of game I was hoping I would be able to work on. And still to this day, I don't actually ever reach out to games to say, hey, I can help you with your game.
Interesting. Okay. They come to you.
I always wait for people to come to me.
Interesting. But many people must come to you and you must say, no, yes.
Right. So I also don't want to spread myself too thin. So what I try to do is time it so I have like one release per year would be the ideal. So that, because even before the launch, after the launch, there's still stuff to do, but the launch is kind of the peak. And so if I can offset those peaks so that, I'm focused on one game, the other games I'm working on, maybe they're knee deep in development. They don't need a lot of business and marketing stuff going on, but still it's good to have someone who knows about the business side, aware of like what opportunities are coming up. So, but then like, around launch time, like Mages of Mystralia is, we're doing a Kickstarter soon. We're going to be doing all kinds of things. Now it's like, I'd say like 90% of my time is on Mages of Mystralia, and like 10% is split between Axiom Verge and Chasm. There are other times when it, clearly it was like 90% Axiom Verge, right, and it will soon be 90% Chasm, and,
right, and so on and so forth.
And so, yeah. So because I take on relatively few games, I want to do depth rather than breadth and have a large portfolio. I have to be careful about what games I choose to work on. And it's not so much that, the ones I decide not to work on are not good. A lot of times it's just not my thing. And so if I'm going to work on something for like 2-3 years, it's got to be something that I will enjoy playing over and over, because I can't tell you how many times I've played through Axiom Verge looking for bugs. I played through Mages of Mystralia and Chasm, every build.
I want to play Chasm.
Oh yeah, I'll hook you up with like the current build. But yeah, it's coming along really well. But yeah, so it's got to be the kind of thing like I will not. I don't want to like be someone who's like pitching stuff that I don't believe in.
Right, of course.
Yeah, because otherwise I'd be a phony.
I feel like you must be very valuable to these developers too, in the sense that, and I don't mean any disrespect, I'm not going to obviously call out names, but I don't mean any disrespect to PR and marketing and the gaming industry generally. I would say 9 out of 10 PR and marketing people don't know what the fuck they're talking about when it comes to games. That they're communications people. They know how to market, they know how to do PR, but they don't know games. Right. Or at least they don't know games to the extent that you know games. And while I enjoy working with these people, I would never go and defer to their judgment on if a game is good or bad. But for you have valuable marketing and PR experience and know-how with that, but you also know games very well, very deep level. I know you know games as well as I do, as well as Greg does. I mean, it's games. You probably, and you know the meat and potatoes and the development way better than I do.
Oh yeah, well I've been in the industry, on the industry side for 16 years.
Yeah, so you know your shit, and that must be exceptionally valuable. When these people come to you, when a Tom Hap comes to you, it must be like, well, this is not only can you be valuable in helping me proliferate this game, but you can be valuable in me and telling me what's good and bad about this game.
Yeah, and I have to be careful on that, to be honest, because so someone like Tom Hap is a far better designer than I will ever be. So, he's and so he's asked me for some feedback on some things, and I always tell him, like, consider me just like one of many people who would play your game and give you some feedback. Feel free to take it, don't take it, because I don't want them to put too much weight on what I say.
Right.
But there are some things where, some common things that I see developers messing up, and if Tom or the Mages of Mistrali team, Borealis or James was doing with Chasm that I thought was broken, I would of course let them know. But one of the challenges is, like, everyone wants to sit in the director's chair and everyone wants to be the lead designer, and everyone, like, I had a meeting when I was at Nintendo when Wii Fit was all the rage, and there was some health insurance company that wanted to do like health promotions, and it was a bizarre meeting. It was like Aetna or Premera or somebody like that. And then after the meeting, like, one of the insurance people was like, you know what would make Wii Fit better is you should do this. And I was like, seriously, you're going to tell Nintendo how to design games? So I want to be very careful. Like, everyone thinks they're a better designer than the actual designer.
Sure. I sure do all the time, and I'm often wrong.
Yeah.
So let's focus on Axiom right now. First of all, I mean, he talks about it openly, so I don't think it's a personal thing. I find Tom Hap to be like one of the most, unfortunately, like, tragic kind of people in the industry right now, because, and I've expressed this to you privately, where I'm like, Tom Hap, for people that don't know, Tom Hap made Axiom Verge by himself. I mean, it's literally like all of it. And the pixel art, and the music, the level design, the animated, like,
programming,
at a genius level, this man functions. He worked on this game on the side for a long time, then put his all into it. He found you, and you guys kind of worked together in tandem, and he had this game that I knew was going to blow. I knew it. I told you many times before it came out. I'm like, and I think you knew. I don't think I was telling you anything you didn't know. But this game is going to be huge. This game is going to be a very big game, and it was a very big game. People loved it, and he, for people that don't know, Tom is married. He had a child that's going to be a special needs child.
Yeah.
Very severe sicknesses that they have to deal with this child. And I just on a personal level, and I'm sure you can speak to it, but it doesn't seem like he was able to enjoy it. It's like, he is one of the nicest, most humble people I've ever met in this industry, who has a smash hit, who probably made a shit ton of money, who should be able to enjoy his life.
Yeah.
And this is what happens, and I don't know, it's so sad.
I know. And I think, like, a lot of our conversations, we still, even though the game launched almost 2 years ago now, we still talk every week. There's still always stuff to do. Like you mentioned, we're doing a retail version. We'd still like to extend it and make sure that more and more people get to see it. So we talk about once a week, and a lot of his time is spent dealing with family stuff when, really he would just like to get back to making games, and he would like to enjoy his family life and
the fruits of his labor.
For sure, absolutely. So fortunately, he was able to buy a new house for his family. Speaking of money, and also more tragedy, right before Axiom Verge launched, his dog, who he just loved, was getting sicker and sicker and eventually died. And he had to sell his car to pay for the vet bills because he was like running out of money. And I, felt really bad for him. He couldn't afford a PS4, so I got him one because I figured if you're launching on PS4, you should have a PS4.
Yeah.
So now fortunately he doesn't have to worry about that, and he was able to provide for his family.
Fantastic.
But the bigger kind of dark cloud hanging over his head is, who knows what those medical bills are going to be over the course of his lifetime. And just, as successful as Axiom Verge was, that will not last his whole life.
Right.
So,
that would have lasted a lot longer had he not dealt with it. Yeah. So that's God, what a terrible, yeah,
the U.S. healthcare system, man.
I don't disagree with you on that front. There's something fundamentally broken and wrong with it, but just from a Shakespearean tragedy level, where a man who should be on the very top of, and is at the very top of his game, who should be working on and probably is working on a sequel to the game, and I just. It's not like I've met a lot of people in this industry, as you have. There's some true dickheads walking around, and some true arrogant assholes out there. I wouldn't wish this on anyone, by the way.
Yeah.
But you expect that the bad things will happen to the assholes, and the bad things
you would want it that way, right? Yeah.
And the bad things typically are happening in my experience to the people that deserve it the least. And Tom Hap deserves nothing but good stuff. So I hope he sees this, first of all. But please pass along my
of
my
course,
words to him,
yeah.
because I have a lot of love for Tom Hap.
Yeah.
So all right, so Axiom Verge is out in the wild. Have you ever said how much it sold, or are you guys keeping that to yourselves?
I don't know if we've ever said, and I'd have to look through the numbers. We wrote up a postmortem, and it wound up being like 10 pages, and I need to go back and like cull it down to something a little bit more manageable.
You can put that on Gamma Sutra.
Yeah, and I'm going to put it on Gamma Sutra. And I think we have like a pie chart of, but it's a very misleading pie chart because we launched on PS4. A month later, we launched on Steam, and there's like a whole variety of reasons why we didn't launch them together. And then it was like it was over a year before the Vita version launched, as you were very quick to remind us.
But to be fair, no one ever said why. There's a perfectly good reason why that was, but no one said that for a very long time, which was basically that you guys were a testing ground for porting, like some sort of engine porting or something like that.
Exactly.
And so they were doing it for free.
Yes.
And so you had to wait. But no one decided to say that, which was not my fault. So I apologize.
That's totally fine. And yeah, and we, because we had promised it, Xbox wanted the game, Wii U wanted the game, and we wanted to bring it there, but I didn't, neither of us felt comfortable releasing it anywhere other than Vita first, because we said it's going to be cross-buy, and so there were people who didn't even have a PS4 who bought it on day one and just said, I'm just buying this now because when the Vita version comes it'll be there.
Right.
And so we started working a little bit on the Xbox One version and on the Wii U stuff, but we were just like, it was always on the back burner until Vita got done. So fortunately it got done.
So the other two games that are in the wild right now are Chasm, which I think I feel like they were announced similar times, but I feel like Chasm was announced first, right? You started working with Chasm first and then with Mages, or is that
yes,
inverse?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, but Mages looks like it's going to come out first.
Yeah.
And what was it about these two games that, to me, it's really obvious, especially with Chasm, why you're attracted to them. But what was it about these games that you said, like, this is game number 2, this is game number 3, and I'm sure 25 other games or something, you were like, no, and these were the ones that I wanted.
So for Chasm, for all the reasons that I think you would also cite, like the very tight controls, just reminding me of all the good things of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and none of the... Not that there were any really bad things in Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but it's a much more streamlined, polished version of it. And also James Petruzzi's vision of like what he wanted it to be, I was sold on. And I was sold on his ability to execute on that. And that's like a huge thing because anyone can have like these really grandiose plans, but it's a question of, can you actually deliver and can you execute? And so the build that I was able to play was like, okay, he understands this genre really well. This is going to be something that I am going to enjoy playing a million times. And so, yeah, and it's just a lot of time, people have been saying like Chasm's been in development forever, and it has been a while, but it's pretty much been in development around the same amount of time that Axiom Verge was in development, or a lot of games. It's just that they announced it really early because they needed Kickstarter funding right from the get-go. And so a lot of people have been waiting for a really long time on it, but it's definitely on track. Progress is being made very steadily. And yeah, so hopefully we'll be... so right now, just so you're aware, we're at pre-beta.
Okay.
And what we're considering pre-beta is when we think this could be done. So we're going to then send it out to friends of ours in the industry, like people whose opinion we trust. Tom Hap is going to be one of them.
Of course.
And, and, have them pick it apart and say, is there something missing? Did we, because we're all very close to it at this point. And so if the feedback is, hey, this is looking really good, I think it's ready to ship, we might be like, all right, let's just polish it up and get it out the door. Or we could like look at it and be like, you know what? We really need to, kind of like with Mages of Australia in the Let's Play video that we did, which will actually air, I think, after this.
Yes.
So the timeline's going to be very confused.
Keep up.
Yes. So there's some things that we can do for Mages of Australia to take it from an 8 to a 10. And we're going to see, like for Chasm, are we already at a 10 or are we at an 8 or 9? So I want to make sure all the games that I work on, I would like to make sure they get to, that some people will consider it a 10 out of 10. Obviously, not every game is for everyone, but yeah.
Right. Well, I think that's a great point because you have this. You're building this small repertoire of games now as on the marketing PR side and the shepherding side that I think is just going to continue to attract great talent to you. So I think it's a smart long game that you're playing. Frankly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And when I quit my job at Nintendo, like probably so it's kind of funny. Like I was kind of funny.
I do that all the time.
Sorry. Yeah. Probably, over the years, I had told my wife, like, this is the year I'm going to quit my job. I'm totally going to go off on my own. I should do this. I know I should do this. And then I wouldn't do it. And then, I don't know what it was, but there was one day that I just had like this moment of clarity of like, if I don't do it now, like there's nothing there's no good reason not to do it very soon.
Right. I can relate.
And so I know you can. I know you can. And so I was like, all right, so if I'm going to do it, I should just do it. And so I told my wife and she was like, yeah, like I've heard this before.
Right.
And then I started making plans. I put together an LLC and I started doing the paperwork, just like taking that first small step and making it feel real.
Almost convincing yourself that I am going to do this.
Yeah. I ordered business cards.
Yeah, right.
I secured a, website and then I told my wife, I am going to tell my boss today that I'm giving my 2 weeks notice. And she was like, wait, you're serious? And so I told her that we should expect that we will have a year without income. And I was very fortunate that I've had a long career in the corporate world with Microsoft and Nintendo, and I was reasonably well paid, though not enough. That I had a nest egg where I could live without a year of income.
Right, to take a risk. And
I could take a risk. And fortunately, it was almost a year to the day before income started coming in the door once Axiom Verge launched. So everything has been good there. So if Axiom Verge had tanked for whatever reason, and that 1 year had to go into 2 years or 3 years, then I might have been screwed. But fortunately, now that Axiom Verge has done well, I can be patient with both Mages of Mistralia and Chasm and whatever next games I choose. So I don't have to like be in panic mode where it's like I need to sign something. I can go a couple years.
That's great.
If I don't have the game that I really want.
Well, as your friend, I'm proud of your success, and I think that's an awesome place to be in.
Thank you very much.
So I wanted to just a look at the episode. Not that you necessarily saw it, but one of the episodes that was pretty controversial with people that I did was There Are Too Many Games. It was this entire thing about the flood of, well, obviously mobile gaming and the race to the bottom that destroyed that market.
Yep.
And makes that market to me a joke. I can't believe I think mobile gaming, and I don't want to be painting with too broad of a brush, but I'm going to anyway. It's just a garbage pit. It's just a garbage pile. And everyone's like, well, this game's good and this game's good. And I'm like, well, when you have 725,000 games on your platform, I hope a few of them are good. A broken clock is right twice a day. That's not impressive to me.
Right.
But I see this leaking into our space.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as a man who relies on digital storefronts to make a living and for the notoriety of your games. And meanwhile, your games are going to get noted, regardless of if there are 20 games released the week that Chasm comes out. You guys are going to be the biggest game that comes out that week, probably on PSN.
I hope so.
And I'm sure you will play the calendar just so in order to make that the case. Are you concerned? Do you share my concerns that these marketplaces, PSN and XBLA, obviously Steam already seems to be gone through the looking glass and seems to be lost? Are you concerned that this is going to have a major negative impact on gaming the way I do?
Yeah, it's a tricky problem because there's no obvious solution to it. So, you could do things like, and I think if I remember correctly, if it was that episode or some other episode where you were talking about like the need for Valve to curate the storefront
right.
and
to basically have people that are like, no, just to say no. Like, say no.
Yeah. So, and I have very ambivalent but strong feelings on both sides of that. So I was a curationist for a long time. Part of me still is that I would very much like the platforms to say, sorry, your game's not good enough. We're not going to let you in. There's a quality bar and you have to hit it. And I think that's going to be the right solution for the platforms 90% of the time, 95% of the time. But every once in a while, like, the counter examples are huge, and that's why it's such a risk. So the one that I go to, like when I was running the eShop stuff in the digital distribution business at Nintendo, if I had a curation process where I would like say, no, I don't like that game, screw that game. I think to myself, if Minecraft, before it became big, came across my desk and I only spent like 5 minutes with it because that's all the time I would have, and I'd look at it and it looks like all this blocky stuff and I don't know like what the goal is, I might have said, no, sorry, I don't want this game. Undertale's another really good example.
Right.
If I spent 5 minutes with it, I'd look at it and be like, all right, this looks amateurish. It's, pass, and there's also like back when I was at Xbox, I wasn't in charge of this decision, but rumor had it that the account management team, they were curating for publishers. They would say like which games could come on the platform, and they said no to GTA 3 because GTA 1 and 2 were
with
kind
these
of
top-down
and it was kind of like a PC franchise, and at the time, this is many years ago, so a lot of people may have forgotten, but there was like this big stigma against PC games, and like everyone was like, oh, the Xbox is just a PC that's attached to a TV, and they're like, no, we're a console, we're a real console, and so I've heard that they said no to GTA 3. That is pretty much what propelled PS2 to such phenomenal success,
right.
And like they had to pay through the nose just to get a version of GTA 3 like 2 years later. So there's huge counterexamples for why a curation process can have either false positives or false negatives, depending on the your perspective. So it can be very dangerous to have a curation process. Though I think you could probably cull out a lot of the garbage without too much risk of missing that diamond in the rough. But that is the trade-off that you're making. The ideal situation, which is what Valve and Steam seem like they're trying to achieve, which I don't know if they'll be able to, is they just want it to be perfectly discoverable. So if you have 100% perfect knowledge of what games are on Steam and what games, and if Steam knew enough about you to say, here are the games that you would like, and that you don't see any of the garbage, then that's no problem, and the visibility is there for your audience, and also as a gamer, you're not sifting through lots of garbage. Unfortunately, they haven't nailed that. They're working towards it, but nobody's nailed that, and I don't know if anyone could nail it because there's just not enough data. People change. Netflix probably has the best process for like understanding what kind of shows and movies people will probably like, but then again, the cost of watching the wrong movie or the wrong TV show, you watch the pilot episode and you're like, that wasn't very good. There's no cost there.
Right.
But you buy a game and you sink 5 hours into it before you realize, all right, this game's not doing it for me.
And then you've lost time and money.
Yeah. So it's
It's interesting because I'm also having Adam Boys on tomorrow when we're recording this, depending on the order of I published the episodes, it might have already been up, where he took he has vehement disagreements with that episode, and he was in a position to know a lot more than I do about it. So I'm going to be interested to see what he says about it as well, because it seems like you guys kind of come down on the same side, which is he had a much more and it was almost like an altruistic kind of thing where it was like, because I was making an argument about money where I was like, well, what is Sony getting out of these games? Like, I know for a fact that some of these games sell literally 300 or 400 copies. Like, there is them getting that game through certification and getting trophies up and paying the people on Sony's end to have to do all that kind of stuff costs them more than putting that game up. And to me, because that might surprise people. There are 55 million PS4s in the wild, and there are plenty of games on PSN that have sold hundreds of copies. I mean, that is not an exaggeration, and
we've had games on, the Wii in particular, if a bad selling game would sell like 30 copies in its opening week, and then it would go down from there.
Yeah, it's terrible. And and I'm not saying, because he was like, it seems to me the insinuation, I guess I'll let him speak for himself, but it seems like the insinuation on my end is that, well, a creator creates and they should have an outlet, and everyone's like, well, you believe in free markets, and I'm like, well, I believe in free domestic markets. I'm actually a protectionist, but I believe in curating a market to make, because the argument basically is Walmart should have every shampoo in the world because they exist. And I'm like, but so you're using that mentality on digital storefronts where discoverability is everything. And if I were Pantene or something like that, I'd be like, what the fuck, dudes? Like, we actually make a product that is actually like reputable, and you're making us sit next to a shampoo like that is 50 cents a bottle that's out of Taiwan or something like that, that might affect our ability to do business. And we've always done business together. And don't you want the quality product? And, that's always been my argument. So when I came up with this idea in that video of having a 12-person jury, basically, my idea is just to say, like, I don't care. Like, and I was like, there could be bad games or okay games. If I looked at a game like, that game that's been going on PS4, Life of Black Tiger. Did you see the trailer for that game?
No.
You have to look this game up. This game is fucking abysmal. Like I'm serious. I can't wait for you to see this thing. Email me after you watch it if you think of it. I'm like, who thought that this game? It became a joke on the internet. I think the trailer has like 500,000 views because everyone was like, what is this garbage? And no one at Sony was like, no, like there's just no place for your game here. But
when I was at Nintendo, I often had like my then worst game of WiiWare, and it would always get worse. There would always be something. There was like a holiday card making app basically, but it was broken. Like you couldn't actually make little cards with it. And then there was like an exercise app where it didn't detect any input. So like it was basically an animation and a timer, and it was so yes, there's plenty of garbage, and that's one that there was literally zero risk that would be the next Undertale or the next Minecraft.
Right. And that's, I guess you have to look on the spectrum of mitigating that risk. Because I understand, I mean, Minecraft is often that story that's told and that people didn't even understand when Minecraft even started to kind of pick up a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's at 120 million units sold now.
Yeah.
And obviously the company was sold, Notch is a billionaire from that game. A billionaire, not a millionaire, a billionaire. And so I understand that no one wants to be the one that passed on Minecraft.
Exactly.
And I understand that that's a risk. But my argument is this, which is, and I'm curious what you think about it, which is if you took that risk and maybe you lost once in a while, maybe Sony makes a decision that was stupid and they lose out. But they're generally known of curating an environment where you're going to get some level of quality. The game is going to be good for someone, as opposed to, I've played games and reviewed games at IGN where I'm like, I don't know why this game exists, and I'm not trying to be rude, but who can possibly enjoy this game that's running at 10 frames a second, that has terrible controls, terrible combat? That game Amy always comes to mind. I feel bad because I always beat it up, but that game's fucking awful.
Never played it, but
it's a really bad game. I give it a 2 at IGN, which I've never given any, because I'm like, I refuse to actually, part of the review is like how I refuse to even play any more of it after a while. I was like, I can't do this. And I wonder, because you come from that indie space where, if I were a Tom Hap, for instance, and I was releasing Axiom Verge 2, and on the PlayStation blog that week, I saw on the drop 10 other games with literally art. Two of them have art that literally was made in MS Paint, with Comic Sans art over it, misspelled, horribly written descriptions. My game has to sit next to this game on the marketplace. Now, I'm not saying that the good makes the bad like equivalent. The good is going to eclipse the bad, but my whole thing is like, just get some of this shit off.
Sifting through that is like,
and it's just gonna get worse.
When I look through, for Axiom Verge, like when we launched, of course, we were on the front page and Sony treated us really well. But week 2, they're on to the next game, and so anyone today, like if you go onto your PS4 and you look for Axiom Verge, it's hard to find. And that's definitely something that Sony, all the consoles have to work on. Like it's not easy to find some of these games, especially when they're no longer new. And so that whole discoverability issue, I'd say, is probably is far worse as a result of all the garbage in there, because you have to sift through all of it to find it.
And it also, I feel like, because I feel like discoverability is part of the problem, or maybe a big part of the problem, but I also feel like it's a reliability on a general level of quality. Like the longer time goes on PSN, for instance, the less likely I'm just going to throw my money down the toilet, because everyone's like, well, you can just go to Metacritic, and I'm like, guys, actually, if you go through all of the games on PSN, most of them don't have a Metacritic score. Right. This seems to be lost on someone. No one's gonna at IGN. We used to try to review every PSN game, and we did it for a while, and it became impossible.
Yeah.
And this was back on the PS3 in like 2009, 2010, when there was a few releases a week. I go on the PlayStation blog, I'm like, who the fuck is buying half of these games, and why is Sony interested in them? Because everyone, so I think your perspective is really interesting here. I'll be super interested to see what Adam says about this as well, because he'll have a little bit more, I guess, direct knowledge of the Sony stuff, although I don't know if he'll be able to talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm probably, I'm guessing that if Adam Boys felt that strongly that there should be no curation, I'm not on that end of the spectrum. But In fact, when I started WiiWare, I was very adamant that we have to curate it. Everything has to go. I wanted to put together exactly a committee, not 12 people, but I wanted a committee with like people with different tastes than mine, and I would be on that committee, and other people would be, and so people could speak to the genres that they were most interested in. Because, like I said, I wasn't into puzzle games and like match 3 and casual games, but I know people are, so I don't want to be like everything has to be my taste. So I felt strongly like we should do curation, but again, there are those counter examples that make me think twice. The other issue that I thought about during that episode when you were talking about Steam is that if I were to say, let's say with Axiom Verge or Mages of Australia is a good example, because Mages of Australia was a large team. Axiom Verge was just Tom Hap. He was going to make that game regardless because that was his hobby. He just liked making games, and even if it was just for a few friends, he would have done it. Mages of Australia, that's it's a business that's like 20 people. They've got payroll, they've got responsibilities. And if they had to invest all of that money, paying 20 employees for 2.5 years, and they didn't know if they could release on Steam or not, that's a really risky, situation to be in. Like, you produce this game, you're like, okay, we're done. Now we want to release it. And if Steam's just like, yeah, somebody here didn't like it, they were confused by it, they didn't understand how the spell system worked.
Right.
So yeah, pass. Then we'd be like, where else do we sell it?
Right. Yeah, it's a huge problem. I think I'm sympathetic to that problem. I also feel like that's why I wanted to cast a wide net with people, but been like, you're not judging anything other than, is this up to snuff in any respect?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And you just want to call the garbage
right.
out. Yeah,
because I'm wondering.
I'm all for that. Right, I agree with you on that.
Because I'm wondering, because I'm not even trying to judge. There's good games, I'm sure, on PSN that have not sold because they're not discovered. Because again, no one's going to take a risk on a game with no Metacritic score that they've never heard of, that doesn't even have a website, whatever it is. But my bigger curiosity in that respect is, with $1 million investment, just was my idea for 12 people that just really focused on this. Would you not make would you not make that money back on the back end because you would raise confidence? If someone at PSN was like, we see what's going on everywhere else and we're afraid of it. We're afraid of what happened to mobile gaming. Steam's a shithole now.
Right.
Xbox Live is even going down this thing. We're going to do something about it. I bet you people will be like, oh man, that's awesome.
About time.
And I bet you they make many times that amount of money just in fucking, and people just being like, I have $10 in my wallet. I'm going to go spend it. And I have a little bit of a higher confidence that I'm going to get something good.
Right.
Know? And so I don't know. I think it's a nebulous argument. I don't know if this is right or wrong. I also admit that I am on the losing end, and there's nothing that it seems like we can do to stop this stem the tide rather.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, because I remember the original XBLA, it was all about curation. Like, and then there are ways to game that curation process. So if you remember, like on XBLA, when XBLA was the main platform, it was bigger than Steam. It was everyone wanted to be there. There would be publishers who would be granted a certain number of slots per year. And then they would sell those slots. So there would be, this secondary market where people would sell access to the storefront.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. That's
that was a huge thing because
I don't think I knew that.
So independent developers, this is during the Xbox 360 years, independent developers could not sell directly. They had to go through a publisher.
Well, that I knew, but then there was a secondary and tertiary market to get to like circulate those slots.
So like I don't want to name any names of certain publishers, but like some low-level crappy publisher would be given a certain number of XBLA slots per year that they weren't planning on using. And so they're like, these slots have value. We'll slap our name on your game and let you sell it. And in exchange, we'll take 50% of your revenue. Or we'll just charge you, $50,000 up front for this slot. And so, that wasn't a good solution.
No. You don't want some rogue market like that either.
Yeah.
All right. So we have a little bit of time left, Dan. The final topic I wanted to get into with you, because we're both politically minded. You're more of a bleeding heart. I don't mean as an insult. My sisters and my mom and most of my family. I'm more what I would call moderate conservative, although depending on who you ask, I might be a Nazi.
I think one thing that I like about arguing with you on Twitter and Facebook and stuff is that, unlike many other conservatives, I get the sense that you and I agree on what the end goal should be.
Like, oh yeah, definitely.
We both want people to have healthcare and good education and security and freedom and all of these things. We might have very different perspectives on what is the best way to achieve that. The really crazy people are the ones who just like, we disagree on what the goal should be. Like,
right. I think that's an adherence. I was on Rubin Report, which you guys can go check out, and I think we talked a little bit about orthodoxy, which I don't believe in. That I think actually both sides have good ideas. That's how I came to be. Even though I was a Republican for many years, I was pro gay marriage a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I was surprised people, I was like, it was 20 years old. I mean, it was 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
That was unheard of in the Republican Party. Now, obviously, last year at the RNC, they have standing applause when they're talking about gay rights and stuff, which I think is a great step forward.
Yeah.
And I was actually pro-life for a very long time, which a lot of people don't know. And actually, that's why I like arguing and talking about people, because my mind was changed by a compelling argument, which is why I like talking about politics. And so I have no I believe in small government and I believe in all those kinds of things, but I'm not orthodox. I always say about universal healthcare, for instance, I'm like, we had this conversation actually privately on Facebook, on our private Facebooks, where I was like, I don't believe it. So if it can be done, then someone needs to show me how it's going to be done. I'm not going to sit here and be like, no. I'm going to be like, this utopian idea sounds fantastic. Show me.
Yeah.
But one thing I was curious about with you is, are you concerned about the politicization of games? And I'm not talking about Gone Home's lesbian love story or anything like that. I don't care about any of that. That's all interesting storytelling stuff that I think is great. I'm talking about, there seems to be a line drawn in the sand with some folks, not at this table, but with some people, where they're like, smaller developers, or even some people would be happy if a Republican, for instance, never bought any of their games. Or if
I remember that episode when you were talking about
2064 read-only memories was the one, and they were kind enough to give me a comment and all of that kind of stuff, and I appreciate that. So I'm not trying to bag on them, but that's an example.
No, and I think also, you could look at it as, and I don't think Matt Kahn was doing it for marketing purposes, but
I don't either.
Yeah, but you could also make an argument that it was a smart marketing move, because his fan base is mostly in agreement with that, and so it's rallying his base, as opposed to, he's not going to be able to reach out to conservatives. So there aren't going to be many Republicans in the Deep South who want to play 2064 memory. It's read-only memories. It's so he's kind of speaking to his audience and like taking a tough stand, which is not really a tough stand, because he wasn't going to get that audience anyway.
Right. The guy in Birmingham's not going to necessarily, might not necessarily buy his game.
But also, that studio in particular is kind of interesting, because I'm not sure if this is like officially the policy of the studio or what, but I believe everyone in that studio is LGBTQ. And Matt,
because they're part of, they do the Gamer X thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So they run Gamer X,
which is GAYMER.
Yeah. And it's a great event. I've spoken there. And so there was a time when, and I think they would probably argue there's still a time now where they feel like they are not part of, there is no safe place for them to be in the games industry. And so they kind of made their own. I would argue, though it's very easy for me to say this, because there's very little to discriminate against for me, or for me to be discriminated for. But it seems like the culture of the entire country has changed enough where they should be accepted everywhere, and they may no longer need to have like their own thing. They're fully embraced and accepted by the mainstream gaming community. I would think they may violently disagree, because their experience is very different from mine. I would say, though, like Muslim developers right now,
sure.
A lot of them.
Rami Ismail is one I interviewed.
Yeah, and I remember you commented on that episode about Rami's response about donating the proceeds to ACLU, and I think that's great. But there are a lot of developers from other countries who didn't feel comfortable coming to the States, because of the official statements of our president.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily blame them. That's why I'm having Mike Bithell on as part of this series, specifically to give a point of view on the indie scene, and kind of, he travels to the United States a lot. So what's going on in England and in Western Europe? What's the buzz there in that community, to see how they feel about the biggest market in the world for their games, or for really anything, kind of seeming closed off to some of them. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I see it a little bit differently, and I'm curious what you think about this, which is, I think that everyone plays video games. And I'm not saying everyone, all 320 million of us in the United States. I'm saying that every walk of life plays video games. You're going to have a very staunch conservative old man who probably plays video games. You're going to have a lesbian woman. You're going to have a transgender person. You're going to have all these kinds of people playing video games. And I don't want to sound melodramatic in this because I don't know exactly how to put it. But I feel like the gaming industry per se seems way more safe for people of liberal persuasion than of conservative persuasion. And I know that simply because I think I'm pretty much the most outspoken and prominent conservative voice in game media. I don't know that anyone else is really taking up that mantle. Maybe some big people on YouTube. I mean, it seems like PewDiePie and those guys lean right, but they're not really talking about policy and all those kinds of things.
Right.
I've often, and over the last 10 years, put myself out there. I'm a huge Romney supporter, all these kinds of things. It made me feel alienated and isolated, and I've lost many friends over my politics. I'm not saying
Which
that,
I think sucks. That should not be a thing.
No, I agree, because I don't think I'm really espousing anything that's out of the ordinary. But I think that the one interesting thing, and I'm curious what you think of this, is that there seems to be a misalignment between outspoken developers who seem to be mostly liberal, media, which seems to be ubiquitously liberal, and then the people who play games who are neither of those things. That, in other words, like a media is talking to a group of people who don't relate to them at all, because there are bleeding heart liberals and socialists, and I'm sure people still run around for some reason calling themselves communists even. And then on the other side, there's probably far right fringe people that play games, but it seems like the media only seems to be interested in talking to a certain group of people, but pretending the rest of them don't exist. I would venture to say that half of Axiom Verge's sales come from the right wing or the center. You know, like for instance,
Possibly,
but you would never know that because of the way it's portrayed. Do you see that at all? Do you agree with that at all, or do you think that the status quo is kind of the way it is? And
yeah, well, I think God, there's a lot of things to talk about on that. I'd say like one thought that comes to mind is that conservatism is a really broad label, and there are things that I think liberals, and I'll count myself on the liberal side of the column, that we can relate to and we can understand and we can have a conversation on. And then there are other things like the way it's defined today, where there is this kind of racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic kind of strain of the Republican Party and conservatives that I think I feel very comfortable saying there's nothing that could be said that I will, there's no common ground. There's nothing where I'm like, oh yeah, I can kind of see your perspective. Yeah, black people maybe shouldn't be working in this neighborhood. Like that is never going to be a thing.
Right.
Or probably actually now they'll say more like Hispanics. But so there are some things, but like if you say like taxes are too high, we can have a conversation about that. That's like, well, there's all these public services and, distribution of wealth. There's stuff we can talk about. So I think the things that people find kind of abhorrent is that racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic side of the conservative movement, the alt-right, so to speak. So that's kind of one thing that I'll just kind of put to the side, and I'm kind of almost comfortable saying, yeah, I don't think there's a need to compromise and kind of bring that into the fold and kind of consider that a valid perspective to have.
Okay.
The other thought that comes to mind is that video games are a very creative. It's a very creative field. There's artists, there's musicians, there's animators, and it tends to be that the more, and I'm not sure why this is, but the more creative the field, the more liberal it tends to be. Probably
the more bohemian kind of.
Yeah. And I think probably it's because even the successful artists have a lot of friends who are not successful artists, and they want their friends to have a safety net, and they understand like. And they'll have friends who are down on their luck, and a lot of liberal versus conservative comes down to that push-pull between, personal responsibility and having a safety net for people who are down on their luck. And, so the conservative argument would be like, you make your own luck, and if you, not to paint with too broad a brush, but if you don't succeed, you have to work harder. And I think the liberal perspective is, yeah, even if you do work hard, there might be circumstances outside of your control, or, even if you are lazy and don't want to work hard, that shouldn't necessarily mean that you have to be out on the streets and starving. So So yeah, so I think that the game development community, by and large, is made up of liberals just because it's that bohemian kind of culture.
Right.
Yeah,
I will say that, I mean, and it's not, I know lots of people in this industry that are very liberal that I'm friends with. So it's not like a lion's share of people that I've had fallings out, fallings out. Yeah, whatever. With over the years, not like a huge people. It's not the lion's share of people that I've known. But I would say on the inverse that what's the interesting thing to me, and I guess what made me start thinking about this, because I've often talked about politics and political correctness and all that kind of stuff that I hate.
Yeah.
I don't like trigger warnings. I don't like all this shit. Because I feel like
I'll agree with you on all that. Yeah.
Because I'm a protector of absolute free speech. I don't think there should be no consequences for your speech. But what I'm saying is you have the right to say what you want, and that if we can protect that sacred thing, then we're going to be like, the minute we start parsing those things is the minute we're going to find ramifications throughout all of what we do and who we are. And that's the one thing that makes me afraid. But I will say this to counter it is that, yes, I would agree that most people are liberal, or at least centrist in the industry, centrist to liberal. Mm-hmm. But what's sad to me is that, there are prominent conservatives in the industry that would never say it, and I know them because they tell me, and that's the, we're talking about people that are like the head of a studio. We're talking about people that are like in the trenches, I remember, I'll never ever forget when I was at GDC, when I was just a fledgling associate editor and editor at IGN. So actually some years ago this week, where he pulled me aside, he works on a big game, and he's like, hey man, like, I'm a Republican. I work at X studio. I really appreciate what you do. I will never say this publicly, but thank you so much, whatever. And then you find out that that happens pretty often. And what I would like to have is a more safe space in a way where just like we can talk and communicate with each other, again, the respectable sides. I don't want the Occupy Wall Street people, and I don't want the alt-right people.
Totally.
I want the totally reasonable people that have reasonable conclusions. And it's the same thing with sexism. I had this theme of sexism, which I'm sure exists in the industry. I won't know. I'm a white man. I'm not going to experience it.
Right.
But I had a prominent female developer tell me some years ago when I was talking to her about it. I was interviewing her about something else, and she was like, "I've never once experienced sexism in this industry, not even once."
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so that's an interesting perspective too. That it's not this ubiquitous men's club of heathens that are treating people with disrespect. So I feel like there's way more reasonable people that can speak to each other if we just get over this hump.
I totally agree. Like I am all about. I personally love debating and getting into meaningful discussions, which for some reason in polite society people don't like to disagree with each other, even if it's like cordially and like reasonable disagreement. People just shy away from it and try to like get back to safe topics. I thoroughly enjoy getting into an actual debate. I like to think that my mind can be changed. It has been changed.
Mine has
like
to.
yours. Yeah.
Yep. Definitely.
And yeah, like that's one thing that I really miss from my college days is like, once you kind of get out into the real world, there's very little opportunity to have a real discussion with somebody about a deep topic where you can like talk for hours about something. You mentioned about the PC talk and the trigger warnings and all of that, and I one thing that scares me about, or not scares, but that's that I don't like about a little bit on the left is that there's this kind of purity of thought test, like this intellectual purity test where so and so is saying the right things but for the wrong reasons, and like there's this very quick judgment of like, and I'm trying to articulate and give a good example, but and I'm kind of missing the trying to come up with a really good example, but there are people who are like, yes, this person is in support of all the things I'm in support of, but they don't really understand. They haven't gone through this or this identity politics thing. And I think
I hate identity politics. I hate it.
Yeah. And so that really concerns me, that when people start judging people not by what they say or what they do, but where their beliefs come from, and if it's genuine enough,
right.
That kind of concerns me. Like then you're getting into the thought police territory.
Right, which is the stuff that scares me, because I feel like I've talked about it in the past on Game Over Greggy's show, where I'm like, I'm all for transgender rights, and that's great.
Yeah.
I don't care. And people have this argument of like, is it a mental illness? Is it a medical condition? Is it a choice? And I'm like, it doesn't matter. Actually, it's their choice. Period. So I support that.
Yeah.
But then you get into the thing where it's like a person uses the wrong pronoun or something like that, and suddenly they're the enemy. And
Exactly.
Like,
yeah, that's a great example.
But it's dude, like they're not trying. You got to be a little more patient. It's like when in the 70s and 80s when people slowly started, and it took a long time, but when people slowly started to become accustomed to like gay culture in the United States and accepting that, but maybe they'd use the wrong thing or they'd use the wrong word or make a bad joke or whatever. Like that's not what's in their heart. They're just they don't know, and you have to be a little more patient with them. And so I think we can learn a lot from that as well. And so I plead for more moderation, basically, and I think politics in games is awesome. I think politics in the gaming industry is becoming very corrosive.
I would just like there to be more debate. I don't think there has to be necessarily more moderate views. I think it's just I wish people were more comfortable just talking about stuff.
Me too. I don't like the like you said, the stigma of we don't in polite society we don't talk about politics, we don't talk about religion.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I think we're very kindred in that way where I'm like I actually love talking about those things.
Yeah.
I'm a conservative atheist. People find that very interesting, and I'm like, well, let's have a discussion about that. Yeah. Obviously, like that's the thing. I always try to put myself out there, my face, my words, my name. I'm not hiding behind anything. And when I like to be challenged, and I like to challenge back. But you are right in the sense that. And that's the thing that I feel like where I feel like the far left or in the gaming industry or the liberalism is actually losing is because if the ideas are so bad on the other side, which some of them are, then you should just give them a rope to kind of hang themselves. Instead, you make it seem like they have something to say. You won't let them say it. Yeah. And therefore, it seems like they have something legitimate to say. That's why there's still global warming denialism, is because it's not that you gave them space. It's that you ridiculed them and called them stupid. Just tell them why they're wrong and shut it down.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so, in terms of like the whole free speech thing, like I've been a member of the ACLU for a long time. I believe a lot in what they do. And like some of the things that they've done is like they have defended the rights of Nazis to march, because that's their free speech rights. And like that kind of thing, I'm proud of the work that the ACLU has done. I obviously don't defend what the Nazis have done, and neither would you, of course.
But of course they do have the right to do that.
Exactly. And that's the kind of thing. And apparently when they did that, the ACLU lost a lot of members, but they stuck to their guns and like, this is what we believe in. We believe in freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is not worth defending if you can't defend speech you disagree with. Right.
That wasn't the intent. Yeah. Obviously, polite speech doesn't need protection.
Right.
All right. Well, that was awesome, Dan. I appreciate you talking to me about that very openly, very candidly. I hope you had fun.
Absolutely.
Keep an eye out for Dan on Twitter at Dan_Adelman. Mages of Mistralia's Kickstarter might be going by the time you see this, but probably not. But keep an eye out for that. That will be out sometime this year on PS4 and PC for sure, and hopefully maybe Xbox One at some point. That's the shirt. And also Chasm coming at an undetermined point in the future that I'm super stoked about as well. Dan, we love you. We appreciate you. You're
Thank
welcome
you
with
very
us
much.
anytime. Keep it here on Kind of Funny Games on YouTube for more interviews and Let's Plays and podcasts and all that. Goodbye.